Chapter 1. The Foundations of the Titan Rome. Rome. It is a name that echoes through the corridors of power, even 2,000 years later. But this global titan didn't begin with marble. It began with mud, myth, and a murder that would define its character forever. In the 8th century BC, the Italian peninsula was a mosaic of tribes: the warlike Samnites, the sophisticated Etruscans, and the hardy Latins. Among them, a small group of settlers founded a trading post on the banks of the Tiber. Legend says Romulus drew a line in the dirt, a border so sacred he killed his own brother Remus to protect it. This act of fratricide established a grim precedent. For Rome, the state was more important than the family, and its borders were more sacred than blood. For over 200 years, Rome was a kingdom. Under the influence of the sophisticated Etruscans to the north, it grew from a collection of thatched huts into a city with stone walls, sewers like the Cloaca Maxima, and a rising sense of ambition. But the seventh king, Tarquin the Proud, pushed the Roman patience to its breaking point. His tyranny and the violation of the noblewoman Lucretia sparked a revolution. In 509 BC, the people rose up and made a vow that would change history. Rome would never again be ruled by a king. This Rex phobia became the bedrock of Roman identity. Chapter 2. The birth of the Republic and the Legion. The Republic was finally born. At its heart was the Senate, an assembly of elders representing the wealthy patrician class, and the consuls, 2 men elected for just 1 year to ensure that no single person could ever grasp total power again. This system of checks and balances was revolutionary. But to survive its neighbors, Rome had to fight. For centuries, the city was locked in constant warfare against the Volscians, the Aequi, and the fierce Samnite hill tribes. This era was the forge that created the Roman legion. Unlike the Greek phalanx, which moved as a rigid block, the Roman maniple was flexible, like a sword with joints. Disaster struck in 390 BC when a Celtic warband known as the Gauls sacked Rome. The city was burned, but the Romans retreated to the Capitol Hill, refusing to surrender even as their homes turned to ash. The Gauls eventually left after a massive gold ransom was paid, but the humiliation stayed. Rome vowed it would never be vulnerable again. They began to conquer Italy, not for glory, but for security, a policy of defensive expansion that would eventually lead them to the ends of the earth. By 264 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. Its borders now touched the sea, bringing them into direct conflict with the superpower of the day, Carthage, the merchant kings of North Africa. The First Punic War was a grueling naval struggle. Rome, a land power with no naval tradition, found a wrecked Carthaginian ship on a beach and reverse engineered it, building an entire fleet in just weeks. They also invented the Corvus, a heavy boarding bridge with a spike. It allowed Roman soldiers to drop onto enemy decks, effectively turning a sea battle into a land battle. Chapter 3. The Hannibalic Terror and Mediterranean Dominance. Rome won the First Punic War, seizing Sicily and Sardinia. But Carthage was not finished. A young general named Hannibal Barca swore a blood oath to destroy Rome, and he would do it from a direction they never expected. In 218 BC, Hannibal pulled off the impossible, marching tens of thousands of men and 37 war elephants across the frozen peaks of the Alps to strike Italy from the north. Hannibal was a tactical genius. At the Battle of Cannae, he lured the larger Roman army into a trap, surrounding and slaughtering 80,000 men in a single afternoon. Rome was in a state of total panic, but they refused to negotiate. They lowered the age of service, armed slaves, and adopted the Fabian strategy, avoiding direct battle and wearing Hannibal down through attrition. The tide turned when Scipio Africanus took the fight to Carthage itself. Hannibal was forced to leave Italy to defend his homeland, meeting Scipio at the Battle of Zama. Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against him, neutralizing the elephants and crushing the Carthaginian lines. Carthage was humbled, and Rome became the mistress of the Western Mediterranean. With the West secure, Rome turned east. In less than 50 years, the legions dismantled the successors of Alexander the Great, conquering Greece and the Seleucid Empire. Rome was now a world power, but the wealth of the East brought a new kind of danger: inequality. While senators grew fabulously rich from looted gold and slave labor, the small farmers who fought the wars lost their land. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried to reform the state by redistributing land to the poor. They were met with the first political assassinations in the history of the Republic, signaling that the era of compromise was over. Chapter 4: The Collapse into Autocracy. The rule of law began to vanish. It was replaced by the great men, generals like Marius and Sulla, who realized that the legions were more loyal to the man who paid them than to the Senate. Marius had professionalized the army, allowing the landless poor to serve. But this meant soldiers looked to their generals for land and pensions, not the state. Sulla was the first to do the unthinkable. He marched his own legions into Rome and declared himself dictator. He used proscriptions, lists of enemies to be executed without trial, to purge the city. After Sulla's retirement, 3 men formed a secret alliance to control the state. The first triumvirate: Pompey the Great, Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and a rising star named Julius Caesar. Caesar left for Gaul to build his reputation. Over 8 years, he conquered what is now France, killing or enslaving millions and amassing a fortune that rivaled the Roman treasury. But his success terrified the Senate. They ordered him to give up his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew that if he did, his enemies would destroy him. In January 49 BC, Caesar reached the Rubicon, a small river that marked the border of Italy. To cross it with an army was a declaration of war. He hesitated for only a moment, saying, "The die is cast." The civil war spanned the entire Mediterranean. Caesar chased Pompey to Greece and then to Egypt, where Pompey was murdered by local officials. Caesar was now the master of the world. He returned to Rome as dictator for life. He enacted popular reforms, but he also acted like a king, wearing purple robes and sitting on a golden throne. The Senate's resentment boiled over. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, the Republic made its last stand. In a flurry of blades, Caesar was stabbed 23 times at the base of a statue of his old rival, Pompey. Chapter 6: The Julio-Claudians and the Flavians. Tiberius was a capable general, but a miserable emperor. He grew paranoid and retreated to the island of Capri, leaving Rome to be ruled by the ambitious and murderous Sejanus. When Tiberius finally passed, the city cheered. They welcomed the young Caligula, believing he would bring back the glory of Augustus. But they were tragically wrong. Caligula's mind shattered. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god, removed senators on a whim, and even declared war on Neptune, ordering his soldiers to strike the ocean. The nightmare ended when the Praetorian Guard assassinated him. In the chaos, they found his uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain. Thinking he was a fool they could control, they made him emperor. Claudius was no fool. He stabilized the government and achieved what even Caesar couldn't: the conquest of Britain. Rome was once again expanding, pushing into the misty, unknown north. But the palace remained a den of treachery. Claudius's wife, Agrippina, allegedly served him a plate of certain mushrooms to clear the way for her son, Nero. Nero began as a poet and musician, but his reign dissolved into narcissism and blood. When the Great Fire of 64 AD destroyed half of Rome, rumors spread that he had started it himself. To deflect blame, Nero targeted a certain small sect. He turned their fate into a grim public spectacle in his gardens. Nero's departure in 68 AD ended the Julio-Claudian line. The empire fell into total anarchy, with 4 different generals claiming the throne in a single year. The army was now the only law. Vespasian emerged as the victor. A rugged, no-nonsense general, he realized the people needed a distraction. He began construction on the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum. Vespasian's son Titus oversaw the opening of the arena, but his reign was marked by disaster. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash. After the brief, cruel reign of Domitian, the Senate chose Nerva, beginning the era of the 5 good emperors. Chapter 5: The Rise of Augustus and the Pax Romana. The assassins thought they had saved the Republic. Instead, they had unleashed a monster. Caesar's heir, Octavian, and his general, Mark Antony, would tear the world apart to avenge him. Octavian and Antony initially worked together to hunt down Caesar's assassins. At the Battle of Philippi, the last remnants of the Republican cause were crushed, leaving the world to be carved up between the victors. The alliance couldn't last. While Octavian consolidated power in Rome, Antony fell under the spell of Cleopatra in Egypt. The struggle for the soul of the empire became a war between the Roman West and the Hellenistic East. The climax came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a massive naval engagement off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, led by the brilliant Agrippa, outmaneuvered Antony's heavy vessels. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria, eventually meeting their end as Octavian's legions closed in. Egypt, the wealthiest kingdom in the ancient world, was now a mere province of Rome. Octavian returned to Rome as the sole master. He was careful, however. He didn't call himself king or dictator. He took the title Princeps, first citizen, and the name Augustus. This was the start of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the first time in generations, the civil wars were over. Augustus spent his 40-year reign rebuilding the city and the state's morality. He famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He professionalized the army, created the Praetorian Guard, and even established the city's first fire brigade. But the succession was a nightmare. Augustus outlived his heirs, his friends, and his rivals. In his final days, he chose his brooding stepson Tiberius to carry on the weight of the throne. Chapter 7: The High Empire and the Golden Age. This was the true Golden Age where merit mattered more than blood. Trajan was the ultimate soldier emperor. He crossed the Danube to crush the Dacians, bringing back so much gold that he funded a massive new forum and a column to tell his story. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest extent. From the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Romania, the Roman eagle flew over 5 million square miles. But his successor, Hadrian, realized the machine was running out of steam. He traveled the world, surveying the borders, and decided to stop expanding. He built a wall in Britain to keep the world out. Hadrian also rebuilt the Pantheon, creating a dome so perfect it still stands today. It was a temple to all the gods, a symbol of an empire that had integrated every culture it conquered. The Golden Age continued with Antoninus Pius, whose reign was so peaceful that he never left Italy. Then came Marcus Aurelius. He was a philosopher who wanted to study the stars, but he was forced to spend his life in the mud of the Danube, fighting off Germanic invasions. During his wars, a devastating plague, likely smallpox, swept through the empire. It claimed the lives of millions, including the emperor's co-ruler, and drained the strength of the legions. Marcus Aurelius broke the tradition of adopting a worthy heir. He left the empire to his biological son, Commodus. It was the decision that would end the Golden Age and begin the long decline. Commodus cared nothing for governance. He believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules, fighting as a gladiator in the arena while the economy collapsed and the Senate plotted his death. Chapter 8: The Severan Dynasty and the Slide to Chaos. Commodus' downfall in 192 AD sparked a new era of blood. The Pax Romana was gone. The assassination of Commodus plunged Rome into the year of the 5 emperors. The Praetorian Guard openly auctioned off the throne, highlighting the total breakdown of imperial authority. Septimius Severus, a general from North Africa, emerged victorious. He marched on Rome, disbanded the Praetorian Guard, and replaced them with his own loyal legionaries, establishing a new military autocracy. Severus's reign was defined by his loyalty to the army. He famously advised his sons, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others." This policy would fundamentally change the empire's priorities. His son Caracalla ignored the first part of that advice. To secure sole power, he eliminated his brother Geta, then launched an unprecedented campaign to erase Geta from all official records. In 212 AD, Caracalla issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. It wasn't an act of generosity, it was a desperate bid to expand the tax base. The Severan dynasty ended in 235 AD with the elimination of Alexander Severus by his own disgruntled troops. This wasn't just another incident, it was the spark that ignited the crisis of the 3rd century. For the next 50 years, the empire was in freefall. 26 different men claimed the title of emperor, with only one dying of natural causes. The throne was now a death sentence. The economic system buckled under the strain. Rampant inflation made the Roman currency almost worthless. The silver content in the denarius dropped from nearly 100% to less than 5%. Chapter 9: The Crisis of the 3rd Century and the Restorer. With the central authority collapsing, the empire began to splinter. In the west, a Roman general declared himself Emperor of the Gallic Empire, encompassing Gaul, Britain, and Hispania. In the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra carved out her own vast Palmyrene empire, challenging Rome's control over the crucial trade routes with Persia and India. This period saw a massive increase in fortifications. Rome itself built the massive Aurelian walls, a desperate attempt to protect its ancient heart. The Persians in the east saw the same weakness. Shapur I, the Sassanid king of kings, launched a massive invasion, capturing Roman cities, and eventually doing the unthinkable, capturing Emperor Valerian alive in 260 AD. Valerian spent his final days as a footstool for the Persian king. Legend says that upon his death, he was stuffed with straw and displayed in a Persian temple, a grim reminder of Rome's fallen prestige. It was Aurelian, the restorer of the world, who clawed Rome back from the brink. In just 5 years, he reunified the empire, first defeating the Palmyrenes and then the Gallic Empire. He realized that the Roman gods were part of a contract that seemed to be failing. He promoted the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as a way to provide a single, unifying religious focus for the fractured state. But even Aurelian's strength couldn't fix the underlying rot. He was murdered by his own secretaries, and the empire slipped back into uncertainty until the rise of Diocletian. Chapter 10: The Tetrarchy and the Iron Fist. Enter Diocletian, a shrewd and ruthless soldier from the Balkans. He seized power in 284 AD and immediately recognized that the empire was simply too vast for one man or even one system to control. His solution was radical: the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four. He divided the empire into east and west, each with its own senior emperor, the Augustus, and a junior emperor, the Caesar. Diocletian implemented a new, rigid bureaucracy and a strict tax system to pay for the massive army needed to defend the expanded frontiers. Inflation was curbed, but at the cost of personal freedom. Diocletian also launched the Great Persecution against the growing Christian community. He saw their refusal to worship the emperor as a direct challenge to his authority and the stability of the state. In a radical move, Diocletian became the only Roman emperor to voluntarily retire, moving to a lavish palace in Split to grow cabbages. He believed the Tetrarchy would continue peacefully without him. He was wrong. The moment Diocletian stepped down, the Tetrarchy dissolved into civil war. The grand experiment in shared power shattered, proving that only an emperor's personal strength could hold the fragmented empire together. Chapter 11: The Christian Emperor and the New Rome. Out of the wreckage of the Tetrarchy, Constantine emerged. In the Roman city of Eboracum, modern-day York, the legions proclaimed him emperor. Constantine knew he had to march on Rome to secure his claim. His rival, Maxentius, waited for him at the Milvian Bridge. The night before the battle, Constantine saw a vision of a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the command, "In this sign you shall conquer." Constantine ordered his men to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. At the bridge, his charge was irresistible. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity. But Constantine didn't just change the religion, he changed the geography of power. He realized that the wealth and the threats were in the east. He decided to build a new Rome on the Bosporus. He chose the site of Byzantium. It was a fortress by nature, surrounded on three sides by water. Constantinople was dedicated in 330 AD. It featured a senate, a hippodrome, and massive forums, but unlike old Rome, its heart was filled with Christian churches rather than pagan temples. While the east flourished, the west began to feel abandoned. The administrative split was becoming a cultural and economic divide. Constantine's conversion wasn't just a personal choice, it was a political earthquake. At the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, he sat with bishops to define the very nature of God, merging the church with the state. This unity was short-lived. The Arian controversy split the Christian world, with different emperors backing different versions of the faith. Religion became the new battlefield of the Roman world. Chapter 12, the barbarian tide and the Battle of Adrianople. The peace Constantine left behind was a fragile one. By the middle of the 4th century, a new threat emerged from the deep steppes of Asia, the Huns. A nomadic people who lived on horseback, they were so fierce that other barbarian tribes fled in terror at their approach. The Huns pushed the Germanic Goths toward the Roman borders. Thousands of Goths gathered on the banks of the Danube, begging for entry into the empire. They weren't coming as conquerors, but as refugees. The Emperor Valens allowed them to cross, intending to use them as soldiers. But Roman officials were corrupt, charging the starving Goths exorbitant prices for dog meat in exchange for their children. The Goths revolted. In 378 AD, they met the Emperor Valens at the Battle of Adrianople. It was a disaster. The Roman heavy infantry was outflanked by Gothic cavalry and slaughtered in the summer heat. Valens was killed, and his body was never found. The legend of Roman invincibility was gone. The Goths were now a permanent armed force inside the empire's heart. Into this crisis stepped Theodosius I. He was a Spaniard and a devout Christian who realized he couldn't defeat the Goths by force alone. He did the unthinkable. He signed a treaty making them independent allies on Roman soil. Theodosius was the last man to rule a truly united Roman Empire. He spent his reign trying to enforce religious unity, making Christianity the official state religion, and banning the ancient pagan rituals. He also banned the Olympic Games, seeing them as a pagan relic. Chapter 13. The permanent divorce of 395 AD. As his health failed, Theodosius knew the empire's internal tensions were too great for one successor. On his deathbed in 395 AD, he officially split the administration between his two sons, Honorius and Arcadius. Honorius, only 10 years old, was given the west. Arcadius was 18 and was given the east. The split was intended to be a partnership, but it became a permanent, jagged divorce that would never be healed. The east had the wealth, the walls of Constantinople, and the grain of Egypt. The west had the history, the prestige of the city of Rome, and a frontier that was about to shatter under the weight of 1,000 years. The division wasn't just political, it was a wall of silence. The two halves began to keep separate archives, separate laws, and separate treasuries. The res publica, the public affair, was now two private properties. Honorius moved the western capital to Ravenna, a city surrounded by swamps. It was easier to defend, but it was a retreat from the world. While Honorius hid, the Visigoths under Alaric moved. They realized that the east would not help the west. The brotherhood of Rome was dead. It was every man for himself. In the east, Arcadius became a puppet for his court. Constantinople turned into a city of eunuchs and bureaucrats, where the Roman identity began to transform into something new, the Byzantine. In the west, the infrastructure of 1,000 years began to fail. The aqueducts were no longer repaired. The roads were reclaimed by the forest. The light of the classical world was dimming, town by town. The division of 395 AD was the point of no return. Rome, the city that had ruled the world for 5 centuries, was now a frontier town in its own empire. Final chapter. The legacy of a divided world. The two empires would never unite again. Though they called themselves Roman until the very end, they spoke different languages, worshipped with different rites, and fought different enemies. The East would become the shield of Christendom, holding back invasions for another 1,000 years. It preserved the law of Rome and the philosophy of Greece, keeping the flame of antiquity alive. The West would fall into a dark age of fragmented kingdoms and local lords. But in its ruins, the seeds of modern Europe were planted. Rome was never truly destroyed. It was simply transformed. Its laws, its architecture, and its ambition became the blueprint for every empire that followed, from the Carolingians to the modern day. The dream of a unified world died in 395 AD, but the ghost of Rome would haunt the Western imagination forever. It remains the standard against which all greatness and all failure is measured. We look back at Rome, not just to study the past, but to understand ourselves. Their rise is our inspiration. Their fall is our warning. The story of Rome is in the end the story of us. Rome, eternal, divided, gone, but never forgotten. This has been the story of the rise and the split of the greatest empire the world has ever known. Thank you for watching.